Now, from Wish TV, your local news source, this is All Indiana Politics.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another edition of All Indiana Politics on this Sunday. And we start this morning with politics and the coronavirus. We're headed for another showdown in the General Assembly in about 24 hours. Brooke Martin is following that.
Phil, that showdown involves Republican lawmakers set to override Governor Holcomb's veto of a bill restricting some local powers during emergencies. The bill is Senate Bill 5. The bill says local health departments cannot impose tougher restrictions than the state during a health emergency. For example, mask mandates or restaurant capacity. Instead, it would require those new restrictions be approved by a city or town council or a county commission. The measure easily passed the House and Senate after lockdowns issued during the pandemic last year. Governor Holcomb's veto is less than a week old. In his veto, he says the bill would undermine the successful balance of Indiana's pandemic response, restrict necessary flexibility in the law, and further undermine local responses to future public health emergencies.
One thing that we learned over the course of the last year and a half is things shift and things move. So I don't want to give up that solid ground. I think the proof is in the pudding when you look at the numbers, when you look at our revenue, when you look at our reserves, when you look at our job growth. These local health officials were heroic and went days without sleeping, doing their job so that they could help save lives. One thing that we learned is this requires cooperation and collaboration. It requires being able to turn on a dime. When the numbers shift and change, we got to work together. We worked with local officials, the state of Indiana, on an hourly basis all over the state. And so it's critically important that they do their job. And I don't want to do anything that undermines our local health departments, our local health leaders to do their jobs.
The head of Marion County's health department also praised that response this week. Dr. Virginia Kane has issued many of the health orders that some in the legislature have criticized for going too far.
We've been grateful to Governor Holcomb, at least I've been grateful to Governor Holcomb, for continuing to allow local health authorities to set the guidelines that make sense for their communities.
With all due respect to elected officials, it's better in the course of a public health crisis to have the experts making the recommendations and the decisions.
If lawmakers vote to override the governor's veto, Senate Bill 5 immediately goes into effect. That means the Marion County health orders would no longer be in effect, including the mask mandate indoors and limits on indoor and outdoor capacity for places like bars and restaurants. The Indianapolis City County Council is set to meet Monday night. Council members could vote to put those orders back in place. Our All Indiana Politics team talked with Council President Bob Bosley.
My focus and that of the council has been on the health and safety of Marion County residents. A safe reopening of our city, providing resources, obviously for our small businesses, and continued expansion of our convention business. So as we're inviting folks from around the world, around the country, to Indy. And I think that we've been doing it right so far. Of all the cities in the country where March Madness could have been hosted, it was Indy. I mean, that by itself, I think, is incredibly significant. Our numbers are down, here in Marion County, especially for a city of our size. I would say that we have done I think, a very robust and very decent job in addressing the pandemic, responding incredibly quickly to it. I can't even remember the number of emergency meetings that we had, in the council. In order to help to fund, any number of actions to make it happen, and those were bipartisan. So I would say that the rest of the country has shown us how well we've done. I would like to see Indianapolis back to normal by early summer, and that is folks, going back to their place of employment, walking our streets, conducting business, going to our shops. I have great hope and expectation that we will see that by early summer.
The Indiana Senate will meet tomorrow at 1:30 for its override vote. The House session is set to begin at 2:30. The council meeting begins at 7 p.m. We'll be watching all three for you here on Wish TV and wishtv.com.
Meanwhile, Republican lawmakers who sponsor the bill say that it's about making sure decisions by local health officials have public input and a way to keep them from going too far.
During the last 13 months, the global pandemic we have come to know as COVID-19 has caused governments at every level to evaluate different rules, policies, procedures, regulations, and laws. The novel coronavirus has forced us to put these legislative platforms through sort of a stress test that most have never experienced before. Philosophically, I believe that when someone who is hired by a board, who is an extension and appointed by an elected body, are empowered to such a level to impose mandates, business closures, and fines, there must be a structural check and balance in place. Through the litmus test of this pandemic, it has revealed many weaknesses and areas of focus in some of our jurisdictional powers of different political and even bureaucratic and appointed positions. This language was not born out of conflict between myself or any local health departments. This language is not a knee-jerk reaction or a combative response to any enforcement action. The vast majority of our local health boards and local health officers have conducted themselves with unparalleled professionalism throughout this unprecedented time, and simply they're heroes. Senate Bill 5 simply creates a structural check and balance on a position that has unparalleled authority under these emergency orders. Senate Bill 5 ensures Hoosiers.
Well, the head of Indiana's election talks about election integrity, seeking for more years on the job, and if she believes the 2020 election was stolen from Donald Trump. Our exclusive interview next on All Indiana Politics. Welcome back to All Indiana Politics. We turn to another office in the State House. Indiana's Secretary of State, Governor Eric Holcomb, naming Holly Sullivan to the role back in March, replacing Connie Lawson. Sullivan had served more than 6 years in the State House of Representatives, including as chair of the House Roads and Transportation Committee. The native of southwestern Indiana also says she will run for a full term as secretary in the 2022 election. And we welcome in Holly Sullivan now. Holly, good to see you. Thank you for being here. Let's start with the obvious question. Sure. Why do you want this job, and why do you want to retain it for another 4 years?
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me. Absolutely, I'm running for another term, which would start as a full term in 2022. I think now more than ever, it is extremely important for Indiana to retain our elections here in Indiana to be managed by Hoosiers. So my top priority is to ensure that elections stay controlled by the state of Indiana here locally, and that they are secure, fair, and transparent.
Perfect segue to my next question. Let's talk election integrity now. Sure. Are Indiana's elections safe? Absolutely.
In 2020, Indiana experienced a fantastic voter turnout, the highest voter turnout since 1992. The election was run with no problems, 0 recounts, and no fraud. So we handled 2020 during a pandemic with date changes and an increase in voter turnout extremely well at the local level, and the state experienced a very transparent and safe, secure election.
What would you change about Indiana's elections system right now?
Right now, what we need to do is maintain Indiana's election system.
You're that confident that it's that good? Okay.
We are doing a great job in Indiana. There's a lot of noise nationally about election security and infrastructure. There's a lot of information coming into Hoosiers from other states, but the Hoosier experience run by Indiana has done a fantastic job. We can always increase securities, as we will use this year with no elections, to make sure we're communicating with our local elected officials and increase where we need to. But we have cybersecurity in place. We'll continue to upgrade those just like we do with any other technology.
How do you convince people here that the problems that we've seen or at least talked about in other places aren't happening here?
And that's a great question. And the very first thing we did when I took office 8 weeks ago today was start a research project around the state of Indiana. We want to make sure we understand what Hoosiers are thinking about the election that they experienced in 2020, because most of this noise and most of the conversation around election security came after Hoosiers voted at the polls in Indiana. So we're going to learn what Hoosiers think, and then we're going to message and continue to maintain our voter confidence, because voter confidence is extremely high in the state of Indiana when we focus on just the state's elections and what happened here.
Is there any way that Indiana would go for a vote by mail policy, kind of like what we did during the pandemic?
Well, the difference, so I would go back to, I was in the legislature, and now I'm in a statewide elected position. The legislature and the legislative process works in the state of Indiana. That's where policy is made, and now I had to pivot out of the legislature into a statewide position, and now any legislation that comes out and is enacted by the legislature, our office will, we're the ones that orchestrate the implementation of that policy, but we do not create it.
But do you support it?
I don't get to vote on that anymore. I'm going to be a resource to the legislature. I will make sure they have all the information needed when they make those kind of decisions in the future, if there is legislation that comes before the legislative body. But my role is to be a resource of information and not to vote and influence those decisions at the legislature. I have a lot of respect for the legislative process. I think we need to keep it in the way it is in the state of Indiana. I feel it works, and it's a process with integrity.
Nationally,
yes.
Do you believe the 2020 election was stolen, like we've heard some people say?
I do not.
Why?
I believe that the states are all different. What happened in Indiana was a very safe and secure election, and I think that's what we need to focus on and what we need to remember as Hoosiers. Nationally, a lot has happened and a lot of investigations have happened with no data-driven or court decisions that have proven otherwise.
Does the talk of election steal, does that hurt, in your opinion? I mean, you've been in this job for a little while now. Does it hurt the trust in the election system from the general public?
I think the national narrative around Washington's overreach, trying to take away control from the states, I think the noise coming in from other states about how they did or did not handle their elections the same way that Hoosiers did, all of that mixed messaging does play a toll, and that's the job of the Secretary of State as the Chief Election Officer, to make sure that I know what Hoosiers are thinking and that we can message properly and continue to maintain the confidence here, because we want voter turnout to increase, not decrease.
Congress is proposing a voters' rights plan. Do you think that's a good thing? Do you support that?
Are you referring to HR 1 and
Yes.
SR 1?
Yes.
No, we are absolutely not supportive of HR 1 in Indiana at the Secretary of State's office. The officials that we elect at the local level that orchestrate and put together our campaigns for our Hoosier voters did an excellent job. There is absolutely no need for the federal government to take over the state's elections and make the state laws invalid.
Okay. Secretary Sullivan, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. I appreciate it.
Coming up, the fight in Congress over the future for GOP leadership. Our political experts talk about that next on All Indiana Politics. Welcome back to All Indiana Politics as we welcome back Republican Whitley Yates and Democrat Brian Gaddy. Good to see you both. Let's start with the battle in the House over the future of Liz Cheney. Republicans are likely to vote her out of her leadership position this week, coming after her public statements about Donald Trump, the 2020 election, and the riots at the Capitol. Whitley, I want to start with you here. What's the message from this vote? And is there any room for criticism of the former president from the GOP?
Well, I think the message is that Republicans get to choose their own leadership. And if they don't feel like Liz Cheney is representative of their common voice, then they have the right to choose their leadership. I wish it wasn't at a time such as this when we could be focusing on what President Biden isn't doing. But at the same time, we need to have this united voice. And I think that them making this move at this time is necessary for the party to move forward.
Brian, your thoughts on Cheney?
Well, the problem is that Congresswoman Liz Cheney believes in telling the truth about former President Donald Trump. He did cite the insurrection, the mob on January 6th. He did spread the big lie that the election was stolen from him. And Congresswoman Cheney is not going to go along with his lies. So because of that, she's being punished by her fellow Republicans. It's really sad.
Whitley, your response to that. Is she being punished?
I don't think she's being punished at all. I think that there's been issues with Liz Cheney in the past, and I personally feel like this is just the icing on top of the cake. Why are we focused on the past president when we have a president in office now who's packing infrastructure bills filled with things that have nothing to do with infrastructure, when the jobs report is terrible, unemployment is up, and we're not on the road to recovery as he'd like to think? Like, we need a unified message, and we have to stay focused on what's happening right now.
Whitley, this could also elevate a Hoosier Representative Jackie Walorski to a leadership role, right?
Absolutely. I think that Indiana Republicans have no shortage of a bench to be able to fill that position, whether that be Congresswoman Walorski or Bouchon or Baird. I'm excited to see how this better positions Indiana in leadership in D.C.
Brian, I want to turn to you now. We've talked already this morning about the legislature's votes on Monday. This will be the third and possibly fourth veto overrides this session. It's hard to recall a time where the legislature has overridden a governor of the same party as often in one session.
Well, it is. I mean, it's just another example of there's just a strong element within the Republican Party that doesn't believe that the coronavirus is something that we should take seriously. And this will be surprising coming from me as a Hoosier Democrat, but I think Governor Eric Holcomb has done a great job for getting our state prepared for this pandemic. But the problem is, even though he has exerted strong executive leadership, too many people in his own party are not supporting him. And it's just really a crying shame that you have too many people in the Republican Party that will not support our governor. So I know it's surprising, but I do believe that Eric Holcomb has done a great job in that regard. So hopefully his veto will not be overridden.
Whitley?
Well, I'll have to agree with Brian that Governor Eric Holcomb has done a phenomenal job. But isn't this what democracy is? Our representatives are elected to represent their people. And if this is something that their constituency does not believe in, why would they just walk in step because he's within the same party? Unfortunately, that's what the Democrats do here in the city of Indianapolis, but that's not how representation or democracy works. And so we have to allow this system to play out, and this is how it will play out. And I'm actually very proud because it shows that we're not a monolithic group of people who are all going to think the same and just do what we think is best because it makes the party look good, but we're representing our people.
Brian, you heard that interview that we just had with Secretary of State Holly Sullivan. Your thoughts on what she had to say?
Well, she once again, she exposed the fact that former President Trump was spreading the big lie. She doesn't believe that the election was stolen. She's a Republican, so she doesn't believe that. So hopefully the Republican Party won't censor her like they almost did Senator Romney out in Utah. This is a big problem in the Republican Party. If you don't go along with the big lie from former President Trump, if you don't support mandates with mask mandates or fighting the coronavirus, you're a pariah in that party. And it's just really a sad thing that they just really won't take the coronavirus seriously, or they won't stop promulgating the big lie from former President Trump. So I'm glad she actually had the courage to stand up and say that the 2020 election was not stolen. Hopefully she won't be censored by the Indiana Republican Party.
Whitley, you have 1 more minute left. Your response.
We're not going to censor anyone who's out here telling the truth. We are not Democrats. I think Holly Sullivan in her new position as Secretary of State is a great and phenomenal choice. I believe that she will continue to keep our elections safe and secure. And I think that Republicans in Indiana have consistently driven coronavirus relief, aid, and response at an all-time level, and we will continue to do that consistently.
Well,
Panel,
the fact is,
we're out of time, Brian. Sorry, good discussion, guys.
Against the package.
All right, fair enough. Next time, we'll see you. Thank you. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
Take All Indiana Politics on the go with you. Download our podcast now. Part of the All Indiana Podcast Network and allindianapodcastnetwork.com.
Thank you for joining us for All Indiana Politics on this Sunday. We'll be back here next Sunday morning, 9:30, right here on Wish TV. Have a great rest of your weekend.